Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to dive into a genuinely fascinating biological mystery. We're exploring how surviving in an extreme, freezing environment literally rewrites human DNA over thousands of years. We often think of evolution as this incredibly slow process that happened in the ancient distant past. But for the Greenlandic Inuit, the brutal Arctic climate and their highly specialized diet have left profound, clearly detectable signatures right inside their genome.
Think for a second about what it actually takes to survive up there in the Arctic. Agriculture? Completely impossible. So for thousands of years, the traditional Greenlandic Inuit diet has relied almost entirely on marine life. We're talking whales, seals, and fish. This means a diet that is just incredibly rich in fat and protein, specifically omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. Now, this is an extreme diet. If you took most other human populations and just handed them this exact same dietary profile, their bodies would undergo some drastic and honestly pretty detrimental physiological changes. But the Inuit, they completely thrive on it. So how is that possible?
All right, let's break this down by defining exactly what we're talking about here. PUFAs, or polyunsaturated fatty acids, are a type of healthy fat that is super abundant in seafood, and they are absolutely essential for human metabolism. But, well, here's the catch. Consuming them in the sheer massive volume that the traditional Inuit diet demands, that comes with a huge biological cost, most notably a severe increase in cellular oxidative stress. Handling that kind of massive biological load requires some incredible hardwired adaptations just to avoid serious health complications.
Section 1. Hunting for genetic signatures. The biological treasure map.
So to understand how this extreme diet is biologically possible, an international team of scientists scanned the genomes of indigenous Greenlandic Inuit. They compared their DNA to European and Han Chinese populations, basically looking for distinct evolutionary changes. They wanted to find the exact places where the Inuit DNA sharply diverged because of these extreme environmental pressures. Think of this genome scan like a massive biological treasure map where scientists were hunting for anomalies. And in this hunt, they found a massive towering genetic spike on chromosome 11. That giant spike, that is our X marks the spot. It represents an overwhelming signal of positive genetic selection.
Section 2. The fatty acid desaturases. Unlocking chromosome 11.
Okay, so what exactly is sitting at that X on the map? Well, that massive genetic spike points directly to a specific cluster of genes known as FADS1, FADS2, and FADS3. These crucial genes basically act as the biological gatekeepers for fat. Let's walk through how this works. First, these genes encode specific enzymes known as delta-5 and delta-6 desaturases. Now, why does that matter to us? Because these enzymes control the crucial, rate-limiting steps for converting the raw fats in our diet, the omega-3s and omega-6s, into the biologically active forms that our bodies can actually use, like EPA and DHA. You can think of them as the chemical processing plants of dietary fat.
By genetically tweaking this exact metabolic pathway, the specific mutation found in the Inuit alters their cellular fatty acid composition. Essentially, because they're taking in such absurdly high levels of marine omega-3s directly from their food, their bodies evolved a genetic variant that actually dials down the internal production of these active fats. It's brilliant. It acts as a built-in biological compensation mechanism to prevent a toxic overload of fatty acids.
Section 3. Adapting to the cold. Beyond just the diet.
Because adapting to the Arctic isn't just about what you eat, right? It's about surviving the brutal, relentless cold. The environment demands a multi-layered evolutionary approach, and the genome scan actually revealed that diet was only half the survival story. Over on a completely different part of the genome, chromosome 1, scientists found another massive signal of evolutionary selection. This one is near a gene called TBX15. You can basically think of TBX15 as a genetic body heater. It plays a major role in the development of a very specific type of tissue in the body known as brown fat.
Now, unlike your standard white fat, which really just sits there and stores energy, brown fat is actively metabolic. It generates heat by literally burning up lipids, a process called lipid oxidation. When a person with these cells is exposed to extreme cold, this brown fat kicks into gear, acting like an internal physiological furnace. And the fact that this specific TBX15 variant is incredibly common in Inuit populations makes this just a brilliant dual adaptation to both their high-fat diet and the freezing temperatures. They are literally using the fat they eat to fuel their internal heaters.
Of course, the body also needs to protect itself from running this intense biological engine, and that's where the FN3KRP gene comes in. It acts as cellular damage control. Scientists found really strong evidence of evolutionary selection here as well. Remember how we mentioned earlier that enormous quantities of polyunsaturated fats cause huge oxidative stress? Well, this gene helps counteract that exact stress. It protects the cells from glycation and damage, which is what allows the Inuit to safely consume their marine diet without the negative costs to their health.
Section 4. A surprising side effect: how diet genes shape our physical bodies. All right, get ready for the ultimate plot twist of this biological mystery. We've talked about internal metabolism, we've talked about body heat and cellular damage, but it turns out these exact same fatty acid genes have a massive, entirely unexpected side effect on physical appearance. When researchers mapped the specific FADS genetic mutation, known technically as RS7115739, against physical traits in the population, the results were absolutely staggering. The data reveals that carrying the derived alleles for this specific diet mutation actually causes significant drops in both a person's weight and their height.
Let's quantify that for a second because it's wild. Carrying this specific genetic adaptation for a high-fat marine diet is associated with up to a 2.2 kilogram. That's almost 5 pounds weight reduction, and a 1.2 centimeter height reduction in the studied Inuit cohorts. A gene that evolved specifically to process whale blubber is actively making the people who carry it shorter and lighter. It is just a spectacular demonstration of how fatty acids can actually regulate human growth hormones.
But you might be wondering, what happens if you aren't Inuit? Well, when scientists looked at European populations who happened to carry the same relatively rare genetic mutation, they found something fascinating. The height reduction, that is still there, but the weight reduction completely disappears. This perfectly showcases how our genetics and our local environments intricately interact with one another. The gene seems to limit height across the board, but the weight reduction is uniquely tied to the specific environmental and dietary context of the Inuit.
Section 5. An ancient evolutionary timeline, tracing the DNA back in time.
Obviously, this kind of deep biological rewiring, where diet dictates your height and your fat literally becomes a furnace, does not happen overnight. We have to trace the DNA back in time. Using complex demographic modeling, scientists actually plotted the timeline of this exact mutation. Roughly 23,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Inuit diverged from East Asian populations. But the fascinating part is that middle date. The data estimates this intense genetic selection actually began nearly 20,000 years ago, likely when these ancestors lived around Beringia. That is long before the Inuit ever split from Native Americans, and thousands of years before they actually set foot in modern-day Greenland. Basically, the genetic preparation for the Arctic happened millennia before they actually arrived there.
And that ancient preparation was flawlessly executed. Today, an astounding 98% of Greenlandic Inuit carry this specific derived FADS mutation. Contrast that with just 2.5% of Europeans. When a gene frequency jumps to nearly 100% in a specific population like that, it proves one thing unequivocally. Possessing this trait wasn't just helpful, it was absolutely essential for the very survival of their ancestors in the freezing extremes of the Arctic.
Which leaves us with a fascinating, almost haunting final thought to ponder today. We've seen how the extreme, fat-heavy diets and the freezing conditions of the Arctic literally dictated the height, weight, and cellular makeup of the Inuit over 20 millennia. Every single bite of food their ancestors ate helped carve their modern genome. So, looking at your own body today, what ancient environments, what ancestral dietary secrets are currently hiding inside your own DNA? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the science around you.